pick up the phone and you say, we need to run an ad next Wednesday. All right, done, boom. And then you smoke a cigar, right? Like that's one end of the spectrum. I don't think anyone should use the word smarketing. It's a really ugly word. The boomers are in a certain stage of the boom. All the career pages basically looked the same. It was all, foosball and free food and refrigerators and like that one time when everyone went on a kayaking trip but then never ever did.
If a data analyst and a support analyst and whatever, these people are getting out of jobs, what are the new jobs that they should be training themselves for and how should they get prepared for that? Hey everyone, I'm Naz. I'm the CEO of Next.ai, the AI CRM that's probably the fastest CRM in the world ever. You should check us out. But I'm with Amit Pande. If you don't know him, he is a GM at C3.ai, the OG enterprise AI company. He has done everything from sales and marketing functions at Avizo and Tact. He has built at platform companies like Oracle and Yahoo. In fact, he's a Stanford GSB alum, and we happen to be at the Stanford campus right now. There are so many hot takes that Amit has. I love the conversations we had before this, and I'm going to ask a few questions about that to him right now. The first question that I definitely want to jump into is, which I find very interesting about your profile, which is also very rare, is you have done everything from UX to product to being the GTM person to now in a role where you have the product and GTM roles blurring. And I want to really understand how that even came about in your career and how are you managing this kind of flipped role from here and there. Like today, and especially at an enterprise company, it's very hard to be in a generalist role where so many of these roles are specialist roles.
Thanks you for having me on the show, and it was great to meet you guys earlier this week as well. There's that old cliche, right, about Steve Jobs and how he said you can only explain things looking backwards, right?
Yeah.
I almost got a PhD in human-computer interaction way back in the days when I was in engineering graduate school. And then, coming from a family where my dad and his dad were like both PhDs in the sciences, I was like, I don't think I would be a great PhD person, even though I was super close to getting that PhD. And then when I thought about what I wanted to do and work on, it felt like at the time user experience was an interesting place for someone who wanted to think about human psychology and business and product and whatever. But one of the things that's interesting, and you can relate to this perhaps as a founder, that you have to turn all the pages of the book to kind of know what the book is about. When I did UX, I realized UX was only a part of the product. When I did the product, I realized that I actually knew nothing about the go-to-market side. I just knew that we were building great products and we would release a product and then we would go on to the next product. This is kind of in my Yahoo Oracle days. And I was kind of happy being in that zone. I was actually happiest, I think, in that window of time when I was working with designers, because when you work with designers and you design the creative, you're all, working in that zone when you are building a startup, you can have this boundary. But then when you're delivering full products, at some point it does cross your mind that you're going to make money out of it, right?
Yeah.
If you don't grow up in America, I think you have a different view of sales. This may or may not be true in Europe in the same way. But I feel like my opinion of sales was that it's something that people do and sort of sales in, money out, and no one studies sales really in school, and no one really. So I had a less informed opinion. And then I went into my first startup, maybe 14 years ago, and I realized, wait, this other side is really hard. And it's way more uncertain. And so kind of working through that journey, and what brought me to business school was I wanted to go into the go-to-market side. So then really I'm glad I went to the go-to-market side because there was a part of me which wanted to stay in product and go into product strategy and whatever. But I think product marketing, for the folks who are thinking about going from product to go-to-market, product marketing is great, right?
Yeah.
It's one of those functions that, you're always have it in top of mind when you're a founder. Every founder I talk to says, do I hire a product marketing person or a demand generation person first, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd say that to just put a pin on that, there was a famous, I forget if it was a British biologist, but he was very famous. He was before Richard Dawkins' time. It was a guy named E.O. Wilson. Wilson wrote a book called Consilience back in the 60s or 70s. And the word consilience basically means the nature of unity of things, right? So he said, look, if you look at, you go microscopic, and you look at how proteins work, and then you go macroscopic and you look at societies work, these things are all really connected. And when I read that book a long, long time ago, maybe when I was your age, I was like, this makes sense to me. And I think that's how I can explain some of what I did. And I'm grateful for the people who took bets on me to keep doing these new things.
Wow. Yeah, that's deep. And as a follow-up to that, like what we're seeing today, and this is what I've been also seeing, right? That these roles are tending to blur. Like if you look at, people used to say that sales is its own org, marketing is its own org. Like sales, you have AAs and BDRs, and marketing, you had like the person who's doing demand gen, your product marketing, all that stuff. You have the product management side and the engineering side, the CS side. But what we're seeing more these days is that sales is not just being done by the sales org. It's being done by the marketing org, by the product org. And what I mean by that is that what sales is doing is that it's waiting for marketing to qualify that lead. And it's looking at what's going to come in the pipeline. Right. So it's already looking at that. It's already in the marketing tools. And at the same time, sales is working with the deal. They need to, let's say, do a POC or figure out what features are coming. So they need to go talk to product. Product is getting involved if they're doing a POC. And like CS is also involved because they want to look at, okay, are there going to be any cross-sell expansion opportunities? What does this customer profile look like? So everyone's involved, like at the sales time. And so these roles are blurring. Like we can literally see that product now goes into the CRM and Gong and listens to sales calls and looks in the CRM to figure out, what are the patterns we're seeing that we can build in the product. And sales is going to the data warehouse and the usage data and amplitude and all these things and trying to figure out what is the trial usage, for example, and how do I pitch to this person, and what kind of things they have seen. So that all of these like roles are really blurring and the lines are really blurring. And I wanted to understand from you, like, how do you see this happening today? Because you have been in the industry for a while, you have actually been through all of these like different roles where the roles have blurred. And like, how do you see this happening today?
It's a great question because in some ways you can take a time series view and say that it wasn't like this 10 years ago, and then another 10 years ago, it was even less like this. So maybe the first thing we can talk about is how did we even get here, right? Why is this happening?
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's happening because the market's changed, and the buyer's changed. And if the buyer was basically saying, hey, I'll pick up the phone and I always buy from Naz and I'm just going to ask Naz how to help me, that was the world a long time ago. And then the relationship between the buyer and the seller changed to the buyer saying, well, starting to talk to your company because I trust you. You as the salesperson is a representative of the company. And now show me the product. Products got more complex. So the role of product orgs really started increasing because in some ways, the salesperson could not have the technical expertise to really explain that product. And so in some way, it's almost like if you unbundle what a salesperson, an all-in-one sales and product and whatever person, if you're a one-person company, that thing got unbundled into, well, this part is more relationship management and opening the door, and this part is actually talking about the product, explaining the product, where it fits into your world. Then really it became more complex than what a product manager could do. And product managers may or may not even be the best folks to map something directly to what you need. I mean, they're great at mapping it when they're building it, but now you're mapping it when you're selling it. So then sales engineering came up. I mean, if someone should do a video of this, like where we look at all these roles and we run a time lapse of the last 20 years and say, like, did these roles even exist? Most of these roles did exist.
Yeah, right? That's true.
20 years ago, sales engineering was not a thing. And so the first anchor point here is that buyers changed, buyers evolved. And so maybe if you draw the spectrum, I would draw the spectrum as on one end was a 100% human buyer with 100% human trust in a salesperson who would just say, tell me what to do and I'm going to do it. This is sort of like Mad Men, the Mad Men era, right? You pick up the phone and you say, we need to run an ad next Wednesday. All right, done, boom. And then you smoke a cigar, right? Like that's one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum is basically AI agents for buyers, buying from AI agents for sellers, right? That's the other end of the spectrum. So we're here somewhere, I think, right?
That's
so that's where the role specialization are. The interesting thing about your question in this other spectrum is that you would expect that based on this evolution that actually roles should get more specialized. You kind of need a sort of what we were discussing with the flat file guy over dinner, that, well, actually you need a producer. Sort of the Hollywood equivalent of this would be you need a producer, you need a showrunner, you need a talent agent, you need the actual actors, you need the scriptwriter, right? Now that still remains true in Hollywood because that's how movies are still made. But in tech, really what changed is that we started building more and more product with AI. And we also at least started using AI for support. I mean, even if you look at generative AI's number one use case today, it's not sales, it's support.
Yeah.
Because, it's more deterministic and it'll slowly move, more towards other things.
It's more outcome-based as well.
It's more outcome-based, where the volume's really high and so on. And so I think the second, so if that's the one timeline on like complete human to complete agent or AI. I think the second timeline is kind of role evolution and then in some sense role compression.
Yes.
And I think role compression was needed because in some ways, the company's view is that, hey, I need fewer people. It's better for my balance sheet and investors want to see that. Sure. But I also think that if you think about people, right, take the positive view of this, that we're in an era where you can be a founder.
Yeah.
You can be a participant in Iron Chef or whatever the equivalent, or the Great British Baking Show, if that's your thing. And you can also be a writer. This was not true in our parents' generation.
Yeah.
You did 2 careers, 3 maybe. Now, maybe in this current generation, do 5 to 7. We'll probably do 15. So, if you're a technical SEO expert, I'm sure technical SEO expertise is great and it's a fun thing for the people who do it. But maybe you want to do more than that. So I actually think that the role specialization is also converging because in some ways the roles got too narrowly defined and that increased the silos. And maybe a final point around kind of where this is headed with GTM in my mind is that I do think that it's a good idea to keep the functions connected loosely, but to think of the roles within the functions as maybe compressing. What I mean by that is that ideally, let's say when you buy a house or when you go to, say, Disneyland, you need someone that's sort of greeting you. You need someone that's explaining the rides to you or staging and setting up the house for you. And then when you're in the house and you have a lot of questions about the house, the person that's in the house should really know how to talk about the house with you. So I think that's where I think sales, marketing, I don't know if sales and marketing will blend together. I don't think anyone should use the word smarketing. It's a really ugly word. But I do think that if you think of this as like marketing as audience and community and content, and then you think of sales as like, there's a lot of work in sales around contracting, proposals, RFPs. It's hard work. Marketing people don't want to do it. Service people can't do it. Product people would absolutely hate to do it. So I think this is why these clusters, I think, should still exist. This is my current view. But ultimately, maybe the last point on that is the theory of the firm and, transaction cost and coordination cost and all this goes back to the idea that it was better to have a firm because you could have individuals, you would coordinate better. But, what does all that mean in the world of agents is an interesting question, right? So I think that there is a happy path in the next couple of years. Initially, it'll be very bumpy because the only way you'll win by the compression of roles, if you are on the other side, I mean, your labor, not capital, is that as a person, you have to embrace versatility in a completely different way than what we've imagined. I think the people that are in your generation, Ben's generation, all of you together, your generation will find this more natural. I think the boomers. Well, the boomers are in a certain stage of the boom, but I think it's actually my generation, the classic Gen X, which is at a point where I think we see both. So maybe that's the only benefit of being a Gen X.
I'm going to use a live example here, right? Like, especially like, look at Ben. I'm going to take an example of Ben. Ben is behind the camera now.
I heard Ben has his own bespoke pens company.
And that's the thing, like, so Ben's working with us, right? We gave him the content marketing lead role, but we don't really know what it means because Ben does a ton of things. Like Ben is shooting this podcast. He helps us figure out, hey, what should we put on LinkedIn? And he literally was in the SaaStr conference. He was going around and like pitching next to like different people, and he's good with relationships. He's going and talking to people. And also he's building Dream Journal, which is his journal company. And so at this point, Ben is an entrepreneur. He's an Insta influencer, by the way. So he's an Insta influencer. He's a content marketer for us. He's doing some kind of sales. And so like we were literally talking about it. It's like Ben is like, I don't think I'm just a content marketer lead, like,
absolutely,
right? And it's very hard to like put a role or a pin to this role. But we know he does a bunch of things which are valuable to us, right?
That's right.
And also valuable to his life. So it is, the lines are blurring and we're still figuring out like how this is going to be. Because
words matter, man. You're so right, words matter. when Disney created the Imagineer role, which is like the role of the person, the team that generates these ideas for rides. That's a thing. You can call them ride designers, sure. I mean, whatever the internal label is doesn't matter. But I do agree that words matter. The tricky part is that Silicon Valley also went through a phase where we had chief fun officers and chief future officers. And then, frankly, chief customer officers hasn't gone anywhere. A lot of that chief customer officer got compressed back into chief revenue officers.
Yeah.
So the revenue function is still, and this is kind of what you're serving for with Next, but the revenue function is so powerful today.
Yeah.
The marketing function is still powerful today. The product function is powerful today.
Yeah.
But kind of this renaissance of finance and HR has not happened. And so to put a pin on it, the words that you used to describe Ben and kind of his, multifaceted, multi-sided sort of experience, that's the word talent in the Hollywood sense comes to mind. And I think we'll all, as companies, have to figure out a way to work with talent that way. And part of that is really the flexibility that, some of this conversation and work that we're all doing, it's okay to do it under a tree, on a bench that, a lot of birds have passed over, It's fine. It's part of work.
And I think what has also happened is, so the 9 to 5 model came from the assembly line times, right?
Totally.
You go to the assembly line, work, come back home. But even that is like really blurring out, because, for example, what we're doing is like we were sitting at a cafe and we're talking to an investor, and now we're sitting here in a park and we're talking to you, and we were hosting a dinner a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
And then we go to our Airbnb and we work a little bit and get some work done, but then we're also going to like do some GTM stuff, and we're trying to like sell to people, going to a conference. And it happens over a Saturday, it happens over a Sunday. Sometimes we actually have to go and chill out on a Monday because we're done enough. So like all that Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 is really blurring out, and your like life is kind of like embedding into your work.
Yeah.
And so it's getting really difficult to say, like when people say work-life balance, is it really work-life balance if you worked 6 hours a day? Or is it really work-life balance when you worked when you had to and when you wanted to, and in the midst of things? Like,
I mean, I think the universal principle here that I find very interesting is that in many ways, if you do your one-on-ones only, I know of a public company where the CEO only does one-on-ones with their direct reports on the weekends. So if you're one of those lucky people that works directly for the CEO of this public company, you only talk to him on the weekends. But he gives you time on the weekends, and that's your one-on-one. So that's the devil's bargain. So the universal principle for me is that in general, sunlight is a great disinfectant, right? Like, which means that you shine light on things and you say, look, this is our culture. And strong companies, strong institutions have always had strong cultures,
Yeah.
People talk about polarizing cultures. And as I've been in the workplace for 20 years now, and seen all sorts of shades of like really corporate steel and glass offices to like these, environments where you're kind of working out of a coffee shop all the time. And one of my big conclusions is that if you self-select into an environment that works for you, it's totally fine. And companies should just be open about it. In fact, I sometimes argue that one of the things Silicon Valley did really badly was, and maybe startups in Europe also did this badly, was that all the career pages basically looked the same. It was all, foosball and free food and refrigerators and like that one time when everyone went on a kayaking trip, but then never ever did. And you could never make out if this was truly a good culture or bad culture. But more than anything else, these web pages were basically like the equivalent of carnivorous plants in nature, where the prettier they look, the more likely you're going into a culture where they're really hiding a bunch of things for you. Whereas there are companies which will say, look, this is actually who we are. I mean, you don't go into boot camp in the military and then say, oh my God, I was really surprised, right? I mean, when I was back in Stanford, I remember one of the pacts we had, the friends of mine who became my close friends over time, was that if there's one thing you should not do in an environment like this, if you chose to come here, is actually complain about if you're taking more courses. Because if you've invested in creating an environment that works for you well, and you're transparent about it, then the general universal principle there is that you'll attract the people that work well for you. And if at some point their life path changes and you've created a good inflow-outflow system, that's good for everyone.
Yeah.
Versus, those companies where someone disappears off a Slack and then you're like, hey, what happened to Todd? And everyone's like, I don't know what happened to Todd, but I'm not going to ask that on the channel.
And then we bitch about Todd like on the side, like, oh, Todd.
And then it turns out that Todd's actually on the Great British Baking Show. And then you're like, damn, I should have been nicer to Todd.
No, but this is a very great point, because I see a lot of startups these days going on LinkedIn and saying, hey, this is not a place for people to slack out. This is a place where you're doing 80 plus hours of work, right? And this is what it's really going to be. And I know people give them a lot of shit because they're like, oh, you don't have work-life balance. What the heck are you saying 80 plus hour work days? But this is like, these guys are just setting expectations straight. Like if they said you're just coming into a 9-to-5 jobs and this is a startup and things will be a little chaotic, people used to do those kind of job description. Yeah. We have books and PlayStation that you can play, which no one actually touches the books because everyone's working. So,
I mean, remember the old keep the main thing, the main thing. The keep the main thing in my mind in this context means that there is some truth to the reactions that have happened, especially in America, but also in other parts of the world around perhaps the culture, the larger zeitgeist going a little too far in terms of you can't say this, you can't say that. I mean, I will not make a comment about whether I, agree or disagree or what my thoughts are about the word woke. But it is true that I think we got to a point where some of this was getting in the way of work, So I think back to the people that are not in tech, right? I think about firefighters. I think about, my mother was a primary school teacher. They went into work, they got a paycheck, they were quite happy with that. They used to work Saturdays most of the time. And there's still people who work on Saturdays and Sundays, and that's part of the job. I actually think that there's a certain kind of elitism that got built into knowledge work. And the biggest thing that AI is now demystifying is that, hey, I can generate a synthetic database data model for this thing that this really smart person on your team was giving you grief for, or I can do a sales comp plan or a great account research thing, or I can update your source systems and whatever with AI. So I think the biggest thing about the human AI question, right, to me, is that yes, there is an interesting challenge that AI will take on certain jobs that we will not do as humans at all anymore. That will happen. But also the other light that AI is shining on us is that there are things AI is doing in a way where you can now make out better the difference between like really good work and lousy work. And the problem is that we had created a lot of, we've all gone to uni in different ways, right? We all over time got very well adjusted with uni. And we thought that the world was in neat little compartments. But actually the world is not like that at all. And one thing AI is showing us is, hey, if you write a great one-page like product description, then write it, or then don't write it, let AI write it. And I think that's the interesting thing for me about this human AI sort of balance, because if you only think about AI taking away all the jobs, well, then we will not question whether some of those jobs are really just a function of time. The example I'll close that with is in the mid-1800s in Boston, there used to be this place, and their official job title was barkers. Okay, and these barkers used to have these long sticks, which were probably as from here to this branch, and they would walk the street and knock on a window, knock 3 times, and then they'll go to the next one, knock. They were paid alarm clocks, and just like there were people who were basically transporting ice overseas, right? Before, and then those jobs just went away.
So you already just started talking about like humans taking, like AI taking over human jobs, right? One of my takes on that is that once jobs will go away, but new jobs will start getting created. That has happened over every technological shift in history. But what do you think those kind of jobs are? Because we are still figuring out, like, if a data analyst and a support analyst and whatever, these people are getting out of jobs, what are the new jobs that they should be training themselves for, and how should they get prepared for that?
I mean, some examples, this goes back to Isaac, Asimov and robot whisperers, and like, you can kind of whisper into the robot, and the incantations that actually make the robot now work because you've tried everything. This would be the future equivalent of like, like kind of whacking your PC when it doesn't work, like back in the days, right? But some people just knew how to do it. And then there's the people who just know how to make a dish which is almost about to go bad, like you're cooking it, and then they say, well, I know I can fix it. So I think a lot of these softer skills, as well as newer hard skills will matter, right? So I think the storytelling skills, communication skills, caregiving skills, those will matter for a long time because ultimately humans need that. If we let a lot of our machines talk to our machines, then you actually don't need humans in the process. Because an AI buyer will buy differently than a human buyer, right?
Exactly.
So they don't need websites anymore and all of that. But other examples of this, I think, would be that, at some point, I think sense making will become a big thing, because we're going to be sense making with larger amounts of data than we ever have had to. And the AI will make sense for us and give us paths and patterns, but then you need almost like a curation function on top of it, right?
Yeah.
And so this expert judgment, I don't think that's going away.
Yeah.
This expert judgment on how you build trust with people, expert judgment on what data set to use or not use, or when to open your mouth, not open your mouth in front of a customer, or when to go completely silent and kind of roll back. And then a final example on kind of jobs of the future that I'm really excited about is that, in some ways, we're moving to a point where near perfect simulations of something are becoming a reality.
Yeah.
I don't think it's a designer job. I don't think it's an engineer job. It's almost like an AI director job, right? Where the analogy I'll give you is, I don't know if the Avengers is before your generation or in your generation, but in one of the right? So the hardest part of dealing with Thanos in the movies is that he snaps his finger and the reality changes, right?
Yes.
But we're getting to that point with AI where using great content, storytelling, and such. Essentially, you think of Sora a couple of years from now, you can simulate a reality right now in front of me, and I wouldn't know it. Not in physical world, but in the digital world.
We have seen all of that, like fake interviewers, AI interviewers
exactly.
and stuff.
So I think one of the ways I see this as being an interesting new job is that there'll almost be a simulator, like a human simulator that simulates what the other side wants, and this could be really interesting for buying and selling situations, but also in other contexts, right?
Yeah.
Like imagine if you could visualize your future self in a true sense, and then it helps you make better choices, like not smoking cigarettes or whatever it is, or choosing your poisons more wisely and all of that.
I would love that for my kids.
Right? And then I think there'll sort of be a counter simulator, right? Someone who's like, listen, this is completely simulated. This did not happen. I think the trust verifier job will remain. Because the human will say, I need to really, maybe there's going to be someone like Ben who will look at that and say, this is not a human video. And I can't explain it to you, but give me a few minutes and I'll tell you exactly why this is not a human video. We'll need that, because otherwise we will get into this very dysfunctional era where
basically the Matrix is becoming real.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, wow. That's an amazing futuristic thought. And so with that, we're going to close this off. Thank you, Amit. This was an amazing discussion we had. Thank you for coming here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. I've enjoyed working with you, rooting for what everyone's doing at Next, and always happy to support new startups and new ideas and conversations that have a lot of consilience and ideally a beverage. And I think we've had both of those this week.
Yeah. Thank you, Amit.
Thank
It was great meeting you too.
Ciao.